Okay, so we are in Hebrews 11, a very famous chapter of the Bible called the Hall of Faith. So we're going to be diving into that today, and we are in verse 1 as we begin. Pardon me as I enjoy this. Okay, so now we have talked about, and we just mentioned it yesterday, that the definition in the Hebrew and Greek of faith is the revelation and persuasion to do God's will. Well, this writer gives even another layer, because just like any definition, you have several layers sometimes, or words that have different layers to it. So he gives another layer to what faith is. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And this comes down to that revelation. And it all ties in, because when you have a revelation from God, then you are sure of something that you're hoping for. That revelation is something that you are sure of. You have a certainty in. And you're certain of it, even though you don't see it in the natural. You may have been given it for a future perspective, or something that is a word, but not necessarily visual. But you have that revelation that you know that this is of God, that this is God. And so you act upon it. And that's what he's going to go into in this chapter, is you have the revelation of what God is wanting to do. Now you are being persuaded. You're following through. There's an action, there's a response to that revelation. So faith anticipates the future. So in verse 2, this is what the ancients were commended for their faith. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So when God made the world, he spoke it into existence. But before it happened, there was nothing. It was dark. There was a void. And God just spoke it into being, and it happened. So, again, by faith, we understand that there was nothing before God created the world, before he formed it by just a word. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. So Abel brings this offering. And how does faith relate? Well, because he has this revelation of what would please the heart of God. And he is persuaded to do that very thing to please his heart. So he brings a sacrifice. Now, could Cain have given, if Cain had given the same thing that he did, the first fruits of his labor, which was the vegetables and fruits and stuff. But if he had have done it from the right heart, God would have accepted it. But instead, he does not, because the sacrificial system has not been implemented at this point. But he comes with a different attitude, and it's that attitude that God does not accept. It's that thanksgiving, that sacrifice of thanksgiving that's spoken about in Leviticus. That's what Abel brought. But Cain did not bring that. He brought an attitude of obligation and disdain and rejection of who God is. And almost like I've got to jump through another loophole in order to please God. That's the kind of attitude he came with. And so therefore, God would not accept his gift. So by faith, he was commended as a righteous man, talking about Abel. And so God, of course, speaks well of his offerings, and by faith he still speaks even though he is dead. So what he has done, because of his actions, because he gave a sacrifice, a willing sacrifice, a wholehearted sacrifice, one that pleased God, that act still is speaking today. It still teaches us today. Now, some Jewish traditions also say that Abel's spirit pleads for vengeance, and that is through many of their writings, and it is more vengeance on Cain's family and on his lineage, which is going to make a little bit more sense when we get to Hebrews 12:24, why he says what this writer says, what he does at that point. But what's incredible is that there's going to be a contrast there, that Jesus's blood doesn't speak of vengeance like Abel's did, but of one of forgiveness, even though they have killed Jesus. So we're going to continue now with some others that are in this passage that the writer focuses on that lived out this faith. So in verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So again, this makes a lot more sense when you put all this together. If you live by faith, you live by the revelation that God is, that Jesus, God truly is the one true God, and you live according to that, then you act upon it, because faith without works is dead. So when you have that faith, that revelation, and you carry it out, and you please God, you obey him, you love him, then you will please God. Simple as that. But if you do not have faith, you do not have the understanding and the belief in who God is, you don't have that revelation, and therefore you're not going to be persuaded to do God's will, then it is impossible to please God. So you have to believe that he exists and that he wants to reward those who are going to love and seek after him. There's that action that follows. Again, it's not just a believing, even the demons believe and tremble. So it's not just believing that he exists, it's believing and putting that action to it, that you're going to seek him. That's the action. And that's exactly what Enoch did. And because of that, he was commended for one who pleased God, because he followed through on that revelation that he had. Now, understanding too, that faith is given to those that are redeemed. It's not a virtue that can be worked up by human effort. God gives the revelation and the understanding, just like he did with Peter, when he says, Jesus asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? Everyone else says this, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, well, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. And Jesus says, this has not been revealed to you by man or your own understanding. This is revealed to you by God himself. And so we receive that knowledge and that revelation by God, and then we act upon it, which is exactly what Peter does. And he begins to live that out. And we're persuaded to do his will, to follow him. Again, what Peter did and the rest of the disciples did. So it's not something we can work up by human effort to receive these revelations. Revelations come from God. And you can't please God without a revelation and that persuasion to do his will. So now we go to, by faith, Noah. When warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. Again, he had a revelation that a flood was coming, that he knew that disaster was coming. God gave him this revelation. He told him how to be saved from it. And so because of this revelation, the understanding of who God is, that he is going to carry out this plan, and he feared God, he loved God, he obeyed God, he built the ark. He was persuaded to do God's will. So by his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So all the world would be lost because they did not receive the same revelation or the persuasion to do his will. They did not obey because they were told that there was going to be a flood, but they didn't believe it, first of all. And then second of all, they had no desire to follow through on that word that Noah was giving. So those who hear the gospel are responsible for what they have heard. And that's exactly what happened with all these people that died in the flood. They were responsible for what they heard, but they chose not to believe it and then not to act upon it. So in verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. So he has this revelation from God, who he doesn't even know. This is an unknown God to him, but he has a revelation from God Most High. And he is so persuaded by this revelation that he knows that this is God Almighty, that he leaves everything. He leaves his home. He leaves everything that he's known to go and obey, to follow God. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. This is the revelation he received. He knew that God was taking him to a place that was going to be built by him, that it was going to be his heirs and his family. And this is what he was looking for. But when Abraham left, God didn't show the land to Abraham before. He just simply obeyed, and he showed it to him after. That's what's incredible, is he didn't show the land and say, this is the land that you're going to have, and this is what you're going to receive. He didn't show it till after he went to the land. So faith is this complete assurance. It's not natural, it is supernatural. So believing that God exists is only the beginning. Now you have to actually act upon what you believe. One who lives by faith is not, they don't look at just the situation as it is. They look beyond in the natural, in that natural vision, and they discern the activity of an invisible God. Living by faith is something that, again, is supernatural. It goes against the natural. But when you do live by faith, oh, what God opens up in that understanding is just, well, it's far beyond all understanding, because it is exactly that. It is supernatural and it's incredible. So by faith, in verse 11, by faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father, because the faith enabled him and gave him the persuasion to follow through. He was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. He knew that God is faithful to complete what he has said, to fulfill what he has said. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, talking about his loins, there's no way that he should have had an heir come from him, except again by the supernatural, came as descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. So we will pick up tomorrow in verse 13.